Hi guys, so welcome to the third part of this video tutorial series, and now we're going to finish up our somewhat Snapchat clone, and in order to do that we need to go back to our main.storyboard and we need to add in one more view controller, and this view controller is going to be where the user can add in, where the user can view all of the images that have been posted. And in order to view that, we're going to use a table view controller because that lets us display a bunch of entries in a table. It's a really useful way of displaying data. So we'll set its size to iPhone 4-inch, and alright, we'll place it just right there. And so that we can test it separately, we'll set it to the initial view controller just for right now, just for some testing. And now what we want to do is we want to create a custom cell. So we'll first make our cell a little bigger because I think that it's nicer to view images if the cell is a little bit larger. We don't want to view them just all small. So next thing we want to do is in each cell there's going to be the name of the person, and there's going to be the image that the person posted. So let's put this image in, and let's put an image view into this cell, and we want to resize it so it's just how we like. Okay, so I'll push it a little bit to the edge, and next thing we want to label to display the person's username. So we'll put that label right in the center, and we'll say username right here. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure we add some constraints to this. So before adding constraints, we'll stretch this out in case someone has a long username, and we'll go down here next and we'll add constraints just like we did before. So we'll click on this triangle and we'll go down and we'll say add missing constraints. Awesome, so now we have a custom cell, but in order to use a custom cell we need to give it a custom cell file, and in order to do that we'll say file, new file, and this will be a subclass of a UI table view cell. So we'll call this image table view cell because it's going to display an image for us. So we'll create that file, and just like we connect view controllers to .swift files by specifying their class, we're going to click on the cell and we're also going to specify its class, and we're going to say it is image table view cell, and it'll pop in right there, and now it's connected. Awesome. So we also want to give this a reuse identifier, and that's basically something that lets you dequeue a cell properly. It basically gives it a reuse identifier, so whenever you're reusing cells then you know which one is which. So in order to do that, we can just call this an image cell, and we'll use that value later. So let's press enter, make sure it's in there. Alright, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to make some outlets in our image table view cell.swift file. So let's open that up right here, image table view cell.swift, and we'll make some outlets in this file. And the first outlet, we can just call it image view, and the second we can call it, oh boy, it doesn't like that, does it? It's saying property image view with type UI image view. Okay, let's try that again. And we have to go and click this right arrow button to delete the connection whenever we're making the connection again. So let's go in here and we'll call it posted image view. Okay, so it liked that. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to make an outlet for this, and we'll just say this is username label. Awesome. Okay, so now this is connected with this with this image table view cell file. Next thing that we want to do is we want to make a file for this view controller just like we did for the other view controllers. So in order to do that, we'll do file, new file, and it'll be Cocoa Touch class, and it'll be a subclass of UI table view controller this time instead of UI view controller like we've been doing. So we'll just say images table view controller will be the name, and we'll press enter, and that'll make the file. Now let's go to the storyboard, and just like we've done before, we'll specify the file, or we'll specify the code file for this view controller, and we'll say images table view controller. Awesome. So that's all connected now. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to go into this images table view controller, and we need to write a function that gets all of the records in our data table in our images data table in the back end. So we'll press enter right here, and we'll make a new function, and we'll call it func get image objects. And in order to get the image objects, what do we need to do? We need to make a query. So in order to get the query code, we just need to know where to look for it, just like before. So we'll go to parse iOS developer, and we'll click queries, and we'll find under basic queries. It gives us all of this query code. You don't want to type this all out yourself. It's boring. It's just a bunch of syntax. We can just copy and paste it and customize it. So let's just pop it in right here. So which data table are we querying? Let's go take a look so we make sure we don't miss the exact spelling. Alright, so we're querying our images data table. We're trying to get one row out of that. So in order to do that, we'll go back and we'll say images. And for the purpose of our app, the user will be able to see all of the images posted by anyone on this application. So we don't need this .whereKey line. That's just a line that gives it a filter. So okay, so we got rid of that line. Now the next thing that we need to do is write some code in here. And before we can do that, let's think about what we're trying to do. We're trying to get all of the image files from parse, and we're trying to get all of the usernames of the people that created those images. And once we do all that, we want to store them in some arrays locally, so in some sort of data structure. And the data structures we're going to use are arrays for this. So we're going to declare two class variables up top, and we're going to say var usernames equals array, and the type for the array will be a string. So okay, so we created an empty array for usernames, and then we want to create one for the image files. So var image files equals array. And how do we store image files with parse? We store them in PF files. So PF file will be the type of the objects in the array. Awesome. So all we need to do now in here is we need to add for each object that we get. These objects that we get are all the rows in the images data table. So one object is one row in that data table. So for each row, for each object in those objects, we want to add the username to this usernames array, and we want to add the image to this image files array. So here's how we do that. We say usernames dot append, and we'll append object of created by, because we'll notice that in our backend right here, the field that we had was created by, and pardon me, looks like I've made a slight mistake. So let's go and fix that mistake first. You'll see that in the database right here, it says username is Akshay instead of created by is Akshay, and all that means is when we're storing the image in the database, we specified the wrong field. So if we go to post image view controller right here, instead of username, this should be created by. Okay. Now that we fixed that, let's go back here, and we're going to say usernames.append object created by, and we need to tell Swift what type that object is. So we know that it's a string data type. So we're going to say object of created by as string. And we'll just do the quick fix that we have right here. Awesome. So next we will add to the image files array. So we'll say self.imagefiles dot append object image. And what are we going to typecast it to? A PF file, because that's how it's stored in our database. Okay, so this code will give us all of it'll give us all of the images and the corresponding usernames. So when do we want to call this? We want to call this when the view controller is loaded. So we will put a function call for this in our view.load. If you guys have ever done any Java programming, view.load for Swift is sort of like the the public static void main for Java. So we'll say get image objects in here, and now that we've gotten the image objects, we want to learn how to display them on the screen, learn how to display them in our table view. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to pop in two lines right here, and we want to say self.tableview.delegate equals self. And the next thing we want to do is say self.tableview.dataSource .dataSource equals self. And we want to add in one more line right here. And basically what we want to make sure is each time, or once we've gotten all of the objects, we've gotten all of the images, we want to reload our table view, and we want to make sure that those appear. So we're going to add in one more line, and we're going to say self.tableview.reload_data. So once we've added everything to our arrays and we have all that information, we'll reload the table view so that it can display all of them. Awesome. So now let's go down here, and when we create a UI table view controller class, it gives us some of this code to start with. So let's specify everything. Our table view will have one section, and the number of entries in our table view will just be the number of entries in these corresponding arrays. So let's say imagefiles.count. So that will be the number of rows. Next thing we want to do is we want to uncomment this, and we want to say tableview.dequeue reusable cell with identifier, and we want to get this identifier that we specified earlier. So let's see what identifier we specified. We specified image cell as the identifier for our cell, so we'll go to images table view controller, and we'll make that the reuse identifier right here. And what type of cell is this going to be? It's going to be an image table view cell, which is a class we made. So we'll typecast it. We're going to say as image table view cell, and it's right there. Awesome. So now we want to configure the cell, and in order to configure the cell, we need to first set its username label. So in order to do that, all we'll do is we'll say cell.username label, and we want to set its text. So we'll say cell.username label.text equals usernames and indexPath.row. And if you're new to iOS programming, you're probably wondering what indexPath.row is. Essentially, that gives you the row for this current cell. What this method right here is doing is it's basically customizing the cell that'll display in each row, and then returning that so that the table view can display that cell. So indexPath.row gives you the row of the cell that it's customizing. So let's say we're in the third row, then we want to display the third username in the usernames array. So that's what we're doing right here. Okay, so next thing that so before we move on, let's just make sure that all this is working. So we'll go ahead and we'll press play, and in our simulator we'll run it, and it's giving us an error. So the error that it's saying is unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional. And the reason for that is right here. We need to specify the name. Okay, so let's give it another try. Alright, so it's displaying our username just like we wanted. Now the next thing that we want to do is we also want to display the image. And this is just some nasty syntax, so I'm going to give this this part of the code to you. And here's sort of what it looks like. So you guys can go and copy this. You guys can pause the video and write down this code, since you don't have it just to copy and paste like I do. So image files index path.row, that gives us the PF file, and this basically saying get data in background with block is basically getting all the data from the PF file and turning it into a UI image that we can use, and that image is going to be var image1. So it's taking the PF file, it's getting the data, it's returning that as image data right here, then we're creating a UI image out of it, and we're setting that equal to the image right here, and then we're saying that imageview.image equals this image that we've just created. But what do we really want? We want to set the cell's image. So cell dot posted image view dot image, and we'll set that equal to image1. And just so it looks nice, we will clip it to bounds. Awesome. And we can get rid of this last line right here. And the next thing that we want to do is let's test it out. Okay, so now it's displaying our image from the database right over here in our data table. And we can actually make this a little bit better. So one error that this code will currently cause, we haven't tested it yet, but one error that it'll cause is if you have multiple entries and you're trying to load them, then not all of them will load as nicely, because the table view won't be being refreshed each time, and getting an image takes some time. So in order to fix that problem, here's what we'll do. We're going to change our code a little bit. So instead of image files being an array of PF files, we'll make it an array of UI image files. Because not UI image files, just UI images. So over here, instead of adding the PF file to that image files array, here's what we'll do. Instead, we'll make a variable right here, and we'll say var image file equals object of image as PF file, and we'll change this array to just images, because they're no longer files. We will actually get the image files first. So var image file equals object image as PF file. Okay, so now we want to get the data from the image file. So now we're going to use the code that we have down here that we just wrote. So we're going to take that code and we're going to pop it up over here, and we don't need to do all this because we already have the image file. So we'll say image file.get data in background with block, and we don't have a cell to set the image for, so instead we will say images.append image1. So that'll basically get us all of the images that we need. It'll basically take all the PF files that we get from the database, it'll get the data for that, turn it into a UI image, and then add it to our images array. So that way we don't have to worry about reloading the table view all the time, because the table view is going to get reloaded here anyways once all of this is done. So just to make sure that this all works, for object and objects, we are going to take this line and we are going to put it right over here instead, so that the table reloads every time you get data from an image object. So in fact, just to be a little safer, we'll take this line and we will put it right in here. So once the image object is added, we will reload the table's data. And since we changed our images array and we called it just images instead of image files, we're going to change that right there. And if you didn't understand what we were doing right here when we were changing everything up, originally we showed a naive approach that's sort of easier to do, but then we changed it so that when you have a lot of images, your app doesn't crash and everything works. And we can test that out once we connect the entire app together. So in order to connect the entire app together, let's think about how the user would want this app to be structured. They'd want to log in, and they'd first want to see all of these images, and then they'd want to see if, hey, maybe they want to post an image. So we're going to actually delete this segue right here. Oops. No, we don't want to do that. We're going to click on just the segue, and we'll press delete. And instead, we will make sure that we have this login view controller right here, and we're going to connect it to this view controller over here. So the first thing the person sees will be all the images once they've logged in. And we'll make this the initial view controller again, so that's the one that'll load first when we start a simulator. But you know what? I sort of want a top nav bar to show so that we can see what's going on. So we'll actually take away that segue, we'll delete that, and we'll add a navigation controller in here. So a navigation controller is basically something that helps you navigate through different controllers, just like it's in the name. So it'll come attached with another view controller, and we'll just delete that. And we'll keep the navigation view controller, and we'll set its size to iPhone 4-inch. So we'll drag it over, and this navigation view controller, we'll click this yellow part up top, and we'll control drag to our images table view controller. And we'll make that images table view controller our root view controller. And now you'll see that there's a top bar there to display whatever we want. In the middle of the top bar, we'll tap, double tap, and we'll write in images. So that'll be sort of the title of that view controller. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a segue, just like we did before, control drag to this navigation controller. Awesome. And now we're going to give it an identifier. So we'll just call it logged in segue. And if you remember earlier, we set in part 1 or 2 of this tutorial, we set a segue between the login view controller and the next one. So we need to go and change that because now we deleted that segue. So we'll go back here into login view controller, and we'll paste in the name of the new segue to perform. Awesome. So now the first thing that happens is the user logs in and they're taken to this screen right here. And we want to make sure that the user can add an image if they want. So in order to do that, we'll take a bar button item and we'll drag it into this navigation bar up top. And we'll just call it add. So that's the button for adding an image. And then we'll take this view controller that we had earlier and we'll drag it over right here, and we'll create a segue so that when the add bar button is typed, we're taken to this screen right here. So we'll we want to make sure that the add button is selected. So make sure you really select that, and it'll get a little fuzzy like that once it's selected. So then we'll control drag and we'll make a show segue, and then you'll notice that up here we also have a navigation bar. So in order to give this navigation bar a title, we will drag in a navigation item and we'll place it in the middle of the navigation bar right there, and then we'll give it a title and we'll say select image is the title of this view controller. Awesome. So now we have everything connected in a way the user might like a little bit more. But what's the last thing that we want to do? Once the user posts an image, we want to take them back. So we need to create a segue that basically takes us back. And in order to create that segue, we can do something a little bit easier actually. We can, rather than making another segue, we can just dismiss this view controller once it's added. Excuse me. So what we need to do is we'll click on the segue and we'll change its type from show to present modally. So the thing about presenting modally now is it won't show that navigation bar up top, but we don't need it to do that. So what presenting modally does is it basically says that instead of creating this navigation path, this view controller will just be sort of presented temporarily. We know that we only need it for a while. So then the last piece of code that we really just need to add in is in post image view controller. Once we post the image and all of it gets saved, we want to dismiss the current view controller and we want to go back to the one before it. So we'll say self.dismiss view controller animated, and we'll set this to true and we'll set this to no. Awesome. So now let's try and run our app. Okay, so we're on our first screen, and I'll type in my username, and I'll log in, and it's showing my name, but it's not showing the image that it should. So we'll take a look at that quickly. But first, let's try and upload another image, and I'll post this image, and it looks like yes, it did get put in our backend, but over here, it's not displaying the images that it should. So in order to fix that up, all we need to do is debug a little. So let's go back and let's go to our images table view controller, and here's what we can do. This issue is probably with reloading the image data. So it takes a little bit of time to get these images. So let's before anything, we'll go in our backend and we'll check that, hey, do we have these image files? And we do. So the image file is still there. We'll double check about that. And yeah, there's 2 image files because we just posted one. So we'll go into our backend. We'll go back into our app, and we'll take a look. We're getting all the image files. We'll get their data in background with block over here, and we'll say self.tableview.reload data. All right, but what do we forget to do? We got all the image files, but over here we forgot to set the cell's image. So let's go ahead and do that. Cell.postedImageView.image equals images of indexPath.row. So basically, if this is the 3rd row or the 4th row, let's say it's the 4th row, then we want to get the 4th image from our images array. Alright, so let's give it another try and see if everything works. I'll type in my username, and beautiful. Everything's appearing now, and let's say I want to add another image. I'll select an image, I'll go here, and I'll post that image, and we haven't added refreshing capabilities because that's a little advanced, but once we restart the app, we should see that image too. So let me log in again. And awesome, so now I see all 3 images and I see the usernames. Everything's working smoothly. Okay, so hopefully that video tutorial was helpful to you. Hopefully you got a little bit more understanding about how to navigate through Xcode and you were able to follow along. I did go through a lot of it really fast. And the purpose of this was not, if you're a beginner, for you to understand what every single line of code means, what each line in the table view is doing. The idea was just so that you follow along and you get a feel for how developing an app is. So hopefully you did get that feel, and hopefully you were able to follow along. So thanks for watching this video tutorial.